In this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 pillars that cause chronic stress and why everything that you're probably currently trying to manage and avoid stress is actually just feeding the problem and not addressing the root here. My name is Matthew LaBosco. I've been working with high performers, executives, and entrepreneurs over the last 14 years, helping them exit the chronic stress cycle. And most of these people were people that were putting forth effort. They were meditating, they were trying to take care of themselves, but they were just kind of kept running up against the same wall over and over and over again. And, most of them, by time I started working with them, felt kind of hopeless about things. I had a reputation in my clinic as the last resort when therapy doesn't work, when meditation doesn't work, when retreats don't work. Give Matt a call, maybe he can help. And so what I want to do in this video is I want to share with you why so many of these things don't work. And more importantly, I want you to walk away from this video knowing which one of these 5 pillars might be the one you need to start with. Really, the key to getting out of the chronic stress cycle is 2 things. One, you have to be able to assess the big picture. Too often we're focusing on minutia, we're focusing on things and putting our effort into a small piece of the puzzle when there's this elephant in the room that we're completely disregarding. That's going to end after this video. The other thing that you have to get better at, or you have to find people at least to do it for you, is you have to ask better questions. I find that when I get on the phone with people and I'm asking them certain questions that I'm going to ask you in this video here, they've never been asked this. No one's ever shared any of this with them, which is mind-blowing to me, especially with the incredibly competent individuals that I get on the phone with and have the pleasure of working with. As I'm sure you watching this video, you get it. Like you're not like, it's not like you're not educated. It's not like you haven't read the things. It's not like you haven't tried things. And so it's so frustrating to try, and with the money and the resources of time that I have seen people put into trying to manage stress, which is going to end after this video. Stop managing stress. It's going to be the big thing we're going to talk about here. Forget managing stress. We're going to learn a different technique, but the amount of money and time and energy put into these managing stress techniques is in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that I've worked with. So not only is this video going to give you the power to actually address the big rock, it's also going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money. So let's jump in. So first I want to illustrate what I see over the last 20 to 25 years now of what I've seen working with people inside of trying to improve their overall health and wellness, whether it's a physical ailment, a systemic ailment, or a mental, emotional, spiritual ailment. I'm sure you've seen these tree analogies before, but I think this is really important to understand because this is going to explain why you might be in a position of feeling super frustrated by everything that you've tried, okay? And so we've got this tree here, and obviously a tree has many branches and many parts of it that branch off into 100 different places, right? It gets pretty complex when you get into the intricacies of a tree, and not to mention all the leaves on these branches and all the complexity and intricacies of a tree. What tends to happen in our world of traditional medicine, healthcare, therapy, personal development is people usually come looking for help because they've got this problem with this branch here, we'll say it. Okay, there's this pain here, right? And that can be a myriad of different things, right? That could be a systemic problem. It could be a digestive issue. It could be an autoimmune disease. It could be headaches. It could be cardiorespiratory, hormone imbalances, infertility, whatever it is. That right there, we'll just call that some type of systemic pain. And systemic are all the things I just listed, right? And then the next person, they have a different branch that's hurting them, right? And we'll call this pain more physical pain. Yeah, so physical pain, my shoulder, my knee, my back, right? I have someone right now that I'm working with that has like pelvic floor pain and no one can figure it out. Like this is physical pain, okay? And so you go to the physical pain specialist and you go to the systemic pain specialist, right? This is where we're headed, right? But then there's the other one, right? Then there's the pain that associated with the mind or emotion, right? Or spiritual. I call it MES. Mind, emotion, spirit. And so that could be anxiety, it could be sadness, it could be disconnection, it could be depression, right? Like all of these, it could be OCD, it could be ADD, it could be whatever acronym that they're going to come up with next, right? And the problem here is that we have a specialist for every branch, every leaf on this tree. We have a specialist, we have a drug, we have a supplement, we have a retreat, we have a widget, we have a gadget, we have an app. I don't know, we've got something for every single branch on this tree. But here's the part that, like, this is the elephant in the room that I think some of us are starting to understand this, but I haven't seen too many solutions for it, okay? It's like we can acknowledge this elephant's here, but we're not really addressing it, right? We're spending, like I said, we could spend 20 to 50K just on this branch right here. And then we spend another 20K on this branch, and on it goes, never ends. So what we need to look at this differently, right? And so if you think about it, like 9 times out of 10, these branches, these parts of your tree you don't just wake up one day and all of a sudden, that branch decides to just, break down. Like, it just doesn't happen that way. There's a reason why, right? And if you are poisoning the bottom of the tree, if there are certain things happening in the roots of this tree, okay, that are not being addressed, well, it's just not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when some part of the tree starts to complain, okay? And this is, I kind of think of this as if we're poisoning the tree, or we have, compromised soil, the environment's compromised, something's wrong down here, and depending on your tolerance for stress, maybe your genetics, your predispositions to certain things, right? Maybe everybody in your family gets a hip replacement. Like, I hear these things all the time. Yeah, sure, there's a genetic predisposition to certain things. As we know with epigenetics, like genes can be turned on and turned off, right? But what determines the gene being turned on that creates some dysfunction or turning off? Or what gets the gene that prevents certain ailments and diseases to turn on and have other people where that disease prevention gene is turned off? Well, guess what, guys? It's the environment. It's the roots. It's the soil that your tree, that you are embedded in. And those roots right here, right? These are the 5 pillars, okay? These are the 5 pillars we're going to talk about today. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I've been doing this for 20 years. Every single person that I've worked with that come in with, a serious ailment, okay? One of these 5 pillars is the problem. It's not being addressed. And when we start to address one of these pillars, things start to shift. So let's jump into those 5 pillars. All right, so let's look at these 5 pillars. The roots of chronic stress. So we have 5 of them. 5 pillars, which are, when I work with somebody, I'm looking at these 5 things and I have to assess, 1, do we have solutions and answers for all 5 of these things? Are they all being tended to in a particular way? That's the first question I asked. And the second question is there a one of these things that needs to be addressed, meaning it's the big rock, so to speak, right? Because this is my point. If one of these roots are compromised, if this is more compromised than all the other roots, well, guess what? This is where we want to start. This is where we want to focus on. We actually don't necessarily want to focus here all of our resources. We can do things to help with that, but we have to primarily look at this first, and this is a secondary focus, okay? That is definitely not going to be the approach when you go to the specialist here. They don't even know about this part of the branch. I mean, I've had people that have a knee problem who also have a hip problem go to the knee person, knee orthopedic, who specializes in the knee, and well, they should. And they say, well, I also have this hip thing. Can you, no, the hip guy's down the hall. I only do knees. It's like, well, wait a minute. Your knee and your hip literally share the same bone. So what do you mean? The femur is part of your knee and part of your hip. Anyway, don't get me started. That's for another video. But we have to assess which one of these roots is where we have to go primarily. Primarily here, maybe secondarily we'll do something for the symptom, right? Cause is where most of the resources go. Secondarily, we go to symptom, all right? So let's go back to our pillar. So the first pillar I look at is honestly what I would say is the low-hanging fruit. And one of the ways you can think about stress, and I've done videos on the chronic stress cycle, so make sure you go to my YouTube channel and check out the one on the causes of chronic stress and the chronic stress loop, because the way I define stress in those videos, and I go deep into this, so I'm not going to go into it in this video, but any time you're stressed, your body basically perceives a problem. Okay, it's a problem that it believes we need to solve for. And so think about these problems as open loops. Okay, it's basically something we haven't solved for. Okay, and it kind of irks us all day long. It's like, hey, did you send that email? Did you talk to so-and-so? Did you sign your daughter up for the team? Did you remember to take the garbage out last night? Oh my God, recycling is coming in the morning. We didn't take, I don't know. Like we all have that list, right? It's the never-ending to-do list, okay? And that's pillar one. Okay, pillar one is what I call everyday loops. And everyday loops are the infinite amount of to-dos that you have, okay? I call it death by 1,000 to-dos. And sometimes I'll get on the phone with people or do a consult, and they just can't stop thinking about everything they need to do, right? It's like they're in my office and they're like on fire, right? They're like, oh my God, I got all this stuff. I don't know what to do. So if you find yourself in that situation, then this might be where I would start with you. We might look at, okay, we need to create a system that teaches you and your nervous system mostly. Every one of these 5 pillars is directly focused on regulating your nervous system, because at the end of the day, your nervous system is what's driving everything. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more here in this video. But the everyday loops are all of the to-dos that you have in your brain that your nervous system perceives are all equally as important. Okay, and that's the problem. There's no ability for you or your nervous system to distinguish between what's absolutely mission critical right now and what isn't mission critical, right? Most people, they orient to their to-do list, or if they remember something, they respond to it as if it's an emergency and they got to get it done right now. Okay, there's very few things on your list that are mission critical, okay? One of the ways that I invite people that are stuck in that loop, the everyday loop, kind of bombardment of things to do, an urgent thing is like your kitchen's on fire, okay? Like that is something that has to be addressed in that moment, okay? Most of the things on your to-do list, I promise you, isn't your house is on fire, okay? What would constitute something that's urgent? Something that if you didn't take care of in that moment would impact your safety, your health, right? Or is time sensitive. For example, it's like, oh, I need to, book my flight. There's one seat left. It's like, okay, that's urgent, okay? Or if I don't fill out that form, or if I don't, get my passport by tomorrow, then I can't do my trip to Europe, right? Because I'm not going to get the passport back. Like, okay, that makes sense. There's a deadline there. But I promise you, most of the things on your to-do list are not essential. So again, I'll do other videos on a whole system that helps through that. But if that's the thing that's really keeping you on edge and can't sleep, then we need to address that, and you need to have a system to manage the everyday loops. The most basic system is you should have one place, let me emphasize it, one place where you write everything you have to do down. Okay, I know usually people that are kind of, I would say being completely stressed out by this, they may have lists, but they got 100 different lists all over the place. That's not helpful, okay? So everyday loops, creating a system to answer for just the everyday to-do things, all right? Because if your nervous system perceives that there's 20, let's just call it 20 open loops, which it relates to as a threat, and on your to-do list, they're all micro threats, and they all are equally urgent, you're going to be in a state of chronic stress all the time, right? Because you're going to perceive that all those things are mission critical, and so they're all problems that are threatening you in some way, and so your nervous system never shuts off, okay? So that's the first pillar, is the everyday loops, okay? That's probably the one that is the easiest one for people to see, because I think we can all relate to the to-do list, the never-ending to-do list. Now, pillar 2 goes a little deeper, okay? Pillar 2 is, I call your primal loops. And your primal loops really drive how your experience of your everyday loop. So let me explain. Your primal loops are basically the loops that directly correlate to the most fundamental need of your nervous system, which is for you to feel safe, okay? And so if we're going to talk about what gives your nervous system the perception of safety, we have to talk about how the nervous system was conditioned and evolved, and that all happens when we're kids. And so the way your nervous system learns how to regulate itself is through two primary needs being met, okay? And these are the two primal loops, right? So the two things that your nervous system at a very fundamental level is trying to answer for is, am I accepted and loved? And is it safe to be me? Okay. Now, if you go into the psychology realm and look into what the psychological discipline calls these two things, is you may have heard of these terms: attachment drive and authenticity. If you want to go into the psychological research and learn more about this, I'm going to touch on a little bit here in this video, but Dr. Gabor Mate, I think, is at the head of his class when it comes to understanding attachment and authenticity. I highly recommend reading his things. He writes on ADHD, addiction, the body, autoimmune disease, and basically relates it back to these primal loops. So shout out to Gabor Mate, somebody that I've studied and taken his courses, and a lot of what I'm about to share with you was influenced by him, okay? And so these primal loops of am I accepted and loved, and is it safe to be me, is absolutely essential to regulating your nervous system. And here's why. This is what you have to understand about the humans in general, human species. Human infants, human children, human offspring, out of all the different species in the world, human offspring is the most dependent offspring, and it's dependent for the longest period of time out of any other animal. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I live here in southern Florida, and very fortunately we have this a beach here where sea turtles come and lay their eggs. It's beautiful, it's a very fun thing to see. But if you're a sea turtle mama and you get out of the ocean and you dig your nest and you lay your eggs, what does that sea turtle mama do after she lays her eggs? She says, peace, see you later, good luck guys, I hope you get to the water and don't get eaten, right? Her maternal duties are over, right? And that's because, you know, the little sea turtles, once they're hatched, like they're pretty capable. Like they can run to the ocean and figure it out. Now, obviously, there's a numbers game being played with sea turtles, right? That's why mom gives birth to hundreds of sea turtle shells, because, you know, when we're playing this game, it's a numbers game. Hopefully most of you get there. We know not all are going to get there, right? You know, human babies, that's not going to work, right? If a human baby, once born, is left on its own, it's going to die. Like it cannot take care of itself, right? And so we have this drive from a biological evolutionary standpoint that we have to get the environment, the people, the caregivers to accept us. It's a matter of life and death, okay? Because if our caregivers don't accept us, we're dead, okay? And so we're in that relationship with our caregivers and our environment instantaneously, okay? And our nervous system is regulating itself by the perception of, am I accepted and am I loved? Okay, so this is where understanding the environment you were living in as your nervous system was developing, it taught you what you had to do to be loved and accepted, okay? Because your environment teaches you that. Now, what's also important to understand is how these two things work off of each other. So we have this attachment drive. We have to get the environment to accept us and give us attention, love, etc. But we also have this other absolutely critical survival need, and that's to be connected to ourselves, right? Be aware of what we're feeling, what we're sensing, and what we're thinking, and have the freedom or feel safe enough to express it. Okay, why is that so important? Well, if you think about it from, again, just a strictly biological evolutionary standpoint, if I'm not aware of myself, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm sensing, and I'm not aware of what's in the environment, that's a problem, right? Like, just think of it. Think of it like you're walking around in the Amazon jungle with all this danger everywhere, but you're not aware that you're in the Amazon jungle. You've created this idea that you're on the beach in Hawaii. Well, you're probably not going to survive very long, right? And so even though our mind might tell us that we're in a beach in Hawaii, our nervous system is screaming at us saying, no, we're not. There's danger everywhere. And so this disconnection to self and the environment is a direct threat. So that's really important to understand, okay? But here's the next piece that's super critical to understand, is that if you give the nervous system a choice, which happens to a lot of us as children, and the choice is you're accepted by your environment or you're connected to yourself, your nervous system will always choose to opt out, disconnect from oneself, which means disconnect from my needs, disconnect from my desires, disconnect from my sensations, disconnect from my body, disconnect from my emotions, and do whatever I need to do to be accepted by these people. Okay, and I have a whole other videos I talk about these adapted versions of ourself, or the survival masks we put on to survive an environment where it's not safe for us to be ourselves and we have to become somebody else. Again, another video you'll find on my YouTube channel. But these two things go head to head, right? We're going to opt out of authenticity and we're going to focus on attachment. Now, you play this out over the next 20, 30 years, we have 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds that I've worked with that are still orienting to their environment and their world as, I need this environment to accept me. And they're still disconnected to themselves, okay? And they're wondering why their nervous system's on fire. So pillar 2 is a big one. And I would say most of the people that I work with, we need to tune this up at the minimal, or this is one of the big rocks we need to really address and start to regulate the nervous system through that pillar number 2, okay? Let's go to pillar number 3. Pillar number 3 has to do with your environment. And when I say environment, I mean literal environment, physical environment, but I also mean the relationships and people in your life. And so this third pillar is another huge one, okay? And I would say this is probably the second most common or popular place that I'll start with somebody as the big rock to why their system's stuck in this chronic state of stress and why they have all those symptoms going on their tree. more often than not, when your system, your nervous system, your emotional system is responding, let's say, and how does the nervous system, communicate to us? Well, sensations, but the other is emotion. So we might feel anxious, we might feel overwhelmed, we might feel afraid, like we're feeling these different communications coming through. Now, in the traditional model, there's a tendency to blame the emotional expression or intensity as the problem. Oh, you have anxiety disorder. Like, what does that mean exactly? Like, we can't get your anxiety to shut off. You're always sad. You're always whatever. These communications are coming through. And the fact that the communications are coming through is what we're calling the dysfunction. The fact that the alarm is going off, right? So anxiety is an alarm system. And so it would be like blaming the smoke alarm for going off when there's a fire in your kitchen, and you're addressing the smoke alarm. It's like, no, the smoke alarm is telling us there's a fire somewhere. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out where's the fire, okay? And so emotions are communication systems, and they're usually on point. It's our job to figure out what are they trying to tell us. And a lot of times what these emotions are communicating to us is there's something that we need to address in our environment, or there's a relationship that we're inside of that's not safe, okay? Here's an example. Let's say that I put you, you're in your house or you're at your office and you have a project to do, and I say, okay, I'm just gonna observe you throughout the day, and I'm gonna watch you go through your day, your work environment or your home environment, just doing all the things you need to do each and every day. And I'm just gonna watch you. And I'm just gonna assess, observe kind of how you function, how you operate on a day-to-day basis. And then as I'm leaving, I say, okay, by the way, we have released in your home or in your office these invisible spiders that if you get bit by one of them, whatever part of your body was bit is going to deteriorate, okay? And then we say, all right, see you later, goodbye, right? And so now, okay, we just planted that seed. Okay, there's this potential danger in the environment. And so our nervous system knows this, our brain knows this. And so I observe you trying to function throughout the day. And I notice that you can't focus. I notice that you're super anxious. You're kind of all over the place. And so imagine someone coming in and knowing you in that environment and saying, you know what? You have an anxiety disorder. You have these problems. And it's like, why don't we give you some type of medication, herb, or tactic to help turn off that alarm so that you can get your work done? That would be silly, right? Obviously, the problem isn't the emotional response. It's the fact that there's these dangerous invisible spiders in the environment that our nervous system is now aware of, and it's saying, hey, there's a problem we need to solve for this. Talk about an open loop, right? That's a big open loop. And so a lot of people that I've worked with, they're in this experience of feeling anxious and all of these emotions. And when we start to ask the question about, well, what environment are they in? Tell me about some of these relationships. It becomes very, very clear why their nervous system is on edge. Okay, I'll tell you one specific client I worked with was a young lady who would have these incredibly gnarly panic attacks to the point where she would just vomit for 24 to 48 hours. Really nasty stuff. And, I started working with her, and I'm, thinking through this framework. She's a young girl, and I had some idea of her family because I worked with her mom, and I had an idea about the family dynamic, and, I had an idea of some of the people in her environment, particularly her dad. And, I got on the phone with her, and one of the things that she said to me was she was overly exaggerating about this incredible relationship she had with her father, right? And so as soon as someone's very exaggerating or makes it a real point to tell me about this amazing thing in their life, I'm always like, why are they telling me this with such exuberance? Like, are they trying to convince me, or are they trying to convince themselves? Well, it turns out in this particular case, it was the exact opposite. It was a very toxic relationship to the point where I would say she needed to create some separation between that space because her nervous system was screaming. It was the perfect example of her nervous system saying, we are in the Amazon jungle. We are not connected to the reality of this relationship. We're not in Hawaii, even though you keep telling yourself that. And so I had to slowly bring her along to get her connected to the reality of her environment, okay? This is what I call, does the map you have match the territory? Okay, so pillar 3 is really about how connected am I to my reality? Okay, because if I have a map of New Jersey and I'm trying to navigate, France or Paris, like that's gonna be infinitely frustrating. And when your map doesn't match your territory, your nervous system knows it and your nervous system is gonna be activated, okay? And so that might be the big rock that needs to be addressed, okay? And so that's pillar number 3. Pillar number 4, okay? Pillar number 4 is actually the systemic pillar. And so what do I mean by that? Chronic stress can be caused from the inside out, right? If you've, have a illness or you're poisoned literally, right? Or you're eating food that's poisonous, or you never see the sunlight, you haven't slept, in a long time. There are certain things that can be happening systemically that can now drive the chronic stress cycle, right? And here's kind of the loop when it comes to systemic stress and, we'll call it the mental, emotional, spiritual stress, is obviously they feed off of one another, right? And so if I've had somebody that maybe has been navigating a toxic environment and hasn't really addressed these primal loops for 20, 30 years, well, now they've got autoimmune disease, now they got hormonal imbalance, now they've got digestive problems, now their system is kind of beat up. And so that might be the thing we have to address first, right? And that's why I've partnered with certain doctors that help, with this process. That I work with when, hey, we need to tune up the systemic thing here. Like the system has been beaten down long enough. The hormones are so out of whack. Yes, we need to address these things, but we do need to support it systemically, and that's where, some of these systemic treatments are useful. But the key is that it's part of the whole process. It's not that balancing the hormones and not addressing the actual thing that may have triggered this whole thing, that's not going to get the job done. And honestly, what I've seen there is you just become dependent on whatever the medication, drug, supplement is, instead of actually addressing the problem. Okay, so systemic it can be a big variable. And, keep in mind, like everybody can tune up all of these spaces to some degree. Okay, and so, my recommendation and when I work with people is I look at all 5 of these things. Because, maybe the systemic thing is not the big problem, but we notice that you don't get outside at all. You don't get any sunlight, right? Like, are you out in nature ever, right? Because that's all going to feed your systemic health and vitality, right? Other things like, do you even eat? Like, what do you eat, right? Those are things that can trigger stress. Like not getting nourishment is stressful to the system. Okay, so pillar 4 has to do with the systemic, okay? And then our last pillar here is mindset. And I have done some videos on mindset too, so check those out on my YouTube channel if you want to go deeper into this. But mindset is also critical to, is this going to create chronic stress, or is it going to help us stay in a state of inspiration, peace, and connectedness with ourselves, right? And there's a couple things that I look for here is, does our mind have a tendency to just focus on all the things we don't want in our life? So if I'm always focused on, well, I want to make sure this doesn't happen, I want to make sure that doesn't happen, I want to make sure this doesn't happen, I want to avoid this pain, I want to avoid this, like a lot of times our minds tend to be completely consumed with avoiding pain. And that is going to create chronic stress, because if you're constantly focusing on avoiding pain, you're constantly focused on pain. If you're constantly focused on avoiding suffering, then you're constantly focused on suffering, right? So that's a mindset shift. One of the other things that I see kind of puts people in these chronic stress situations when it comes to their mindset is when they're constantly focused on reaching an ideal or an ambiguous target. To me, it's the same as my goal is to get to the horizon. And I'm constantly measuring my success or my value on, and have I reached the horizon yet? Right? So you can imagine that. Like, you just signed up for stress forever because you can't get to the horizon, guys, right? There is no way to get to the horizon. You can't get to an ideal. There's no destination called I've arrived and everything's okay. Like, I hate to break it to you, that doesn't exist, right? And so we can use ideals as a kind of a guiding light, a North Star. But if I'm constantly measuring where I am against the horizon or against some ideal, I will only always feel defeated, not enough, etc., etc. Okay? And so that may be a big rock, all right? That might be where we start, and starting to train people to, one of my favorite techniques is teaching them how to measure backwards. As I say in some of these other videos you'll find on my YouTube channel is, don't be the kid in the back seat when you're driving across country and every 10 minutes saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Right? No, we've traveled to 4 states. So let's acknowledge that we've done that, occasionally, and that we're making progress, as opposed to constantly being reminded that we're not there yet. Like that again, just creates stress. Okay. And so I hope you can see that through these 5 things, that there's probably places you can tune up in all 5 of these pillars, right? I'm going through this right now with you, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a couple places I can tune up here. But the real question you want to ask yourself is one of these things the big thing, right? Like, is it obvious to you, like, ooh, wow, Matt, when you said that one, it's like, ooh, yep, that's the elephant in the room, and oh man, I'm not addressing that. Well, okay, that's okay, but it's what's not okay is not taking action on it if you're really ready to do something about it. Now, you don't necessarily have to know how to get out of it or how to address it. Okay, so don't let that frustrate you. Like, most likely you probably don't, right? Or maybe you have some ideas, right? But the fact that you don't know how to solve for it yet, don't let that be a deterrent. Okay, celebrate the fact that, wow, I think I've identified the big rock here, okay? So that you can stop this wild goose chase, all right? So that you can take whatever resources that you're using, okay? Time and money, okay? Your 2 resources. And instead of putting them all on the branch, you can put them on the big rock, the pillar that's gonna move the needle the most.